Hello, everyone, and welcome to Module 3, Legal and Ethical Issues. This is going to be a really important module for you to pay attention to. Let's get started. So the objectives for today are to know the difference between legal and ethical issues, understand the aide's role with legal and ethical issues, understand the patient's rights and responsibilities, understand the aide's rights and responsibilities, and be able to give examples of ethical and unethical behaviors. So, legal and ethical issues. What is the difference between a legal issue and an ethical issue? Legal and ethical issues are very important to the aide. When working closely with any type of patient, the aide must have a clear understanding of these issues. Aides, like other healthcare professionals, must follow all agencies' legal and ethical policies and/or protocols. But what is the difference between a legal issue and an ethical issue? Ethics deals with right and wrong. It is having a sense of duty and responsibility towards others and situation and guides us to do what we should do. An ethical person feels that they always try to do the right thing. Legal issues tells us what we must do. Laws are put in place based on ethics. Governments establish laws to ensure people's safety. In healthcare, ethics and laws protect the patients who are receiving care and the caregivers who are providing the care. So let's talk a little bit more about legal and ethical issues. Many agencies establish their own set of guidelines for ethical behavior. It is often outlined in a document called a code of conduct. Certainly could be called other things, but that's what many agencies call it. It is helpful for the aide to become familiar with their agency's mission or vision, statement, and code of conduct. So what is your agency's mission or their vision statement? Have you seen the code of conduct? If not, hit pause and review that now with your supervisor. So let's talk a little bit more about some examples of ethical and legal behaviors. So some examples are being honest at all times. Is that an ethical behavior? Yes. This includes documentation and reporting accurately how long tasks took to perform. Protecting patients' confidentiality, abiding by the patient's care plan and never performing a task outside of what you have trained or been cleared to do. Reporting patients' observations to your supervisor. This includes suspected abuse or neglect. And not accepting gifts or money from patients. So let's talk a little bit more about patient rights and responsibilities. Each agency should have a written statement to be given to patients, outlining the patient's rights and also the home care aide's rights. And yes, just as the patient has rights, you have rights. This document will vary, however, they should include some basic information. As well as being treated ethically and legally, patients have the right to that they need to be informed of prior to receiving services from a home care agency. So that is one of their rights, is to know when someone is coming and to be informed prior to services. Each agency should have a written statement to be given out to patients. This document, we've talked about how it varies. However, if you look at the document, you're going to see some important phone numbers. And those are numbers that have to be given according to licensure to patients in order to be able to file a grievance. Take some time and read through that. So I'm going to pause, ask your supervisor if you can review that at this point with them. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about patients' rights. Patients have the right to be treated with dignity and respect. Patients should not be treated differently based on their gender, race, national origin, religion, beliefs, age, financial status, sexual preference, or diagnosis. This also applies to the aid. It is the expectation that the patient will treat the aid with respect as well. Patients should have all personal property treated with respect as well. Patients have the right to participate in decision making. This includes knowing who will be a part of their healthcare team, changes to their plan of care, as well as participating in their plan of care development, and refusing treatment without fear of repercussions. So what does that mean? What's the word repercussions? That means that they have the right to be able to voice concerns without fearing that someone from the agency is going to do something that negatively impacts them. And that's quite sad, isn't it? So thinking about the fear that someone's going to hurt them or report something about them. Many of our patients, their greatest fear is going to long-term placement. So that often is a fear of theirs. So they may refuse to be able to report things because they're afraid that something may happen to them. So let's talk about confidentiality. Patients have the right to privacy. Confidentiality cannot be stressed enough. Patients' medical, family, financial information, as well as other information that an aide might learn while working with a patient in their home, should be kept within the strictest of confidence. Patients have the right to quality care. Patients should be able to expect that their aide has been adequately trained and that the agency has the resources to provide the best care possible. Agencies should inform patients that there are limitations to services that are being requested. Also, part of quality care is the expectation that patients should never be abused physically, emotionally, verbally, or sexually by caregivers. Likewise, the aide should also expect to perform quality care without being abused in any way by the patient or any family member of the patient. Legal and ethical issues. Patients have the right to be informed of all financial information pertaining to their care. If the client asks you at any time about how their care is being paid for, please contact your supervisor in order for the client to get the appropriate information about payment for services. Just as patients have rights, employees have rights. So let's talk about employee rights. These rights cover wage per hour issues, your right to work in a free environment free from discrimination and harassment, receive equal pay for equal work, meaning that all genders should be compensated the same based on job and experience, the right to time off for family medical leave, and multitudes of rights surrounding workplace health and safety. You have the right to be treated kindly by your patients, to be free from harassment from patients' families and the office for the work that you do, and feel safe in your job. You are never expected to do any work that is not listed on your plan of care and care for anyone other than the patient. For a comprehensive listing and explanation of employee rights, visit the U.S. Department of Labor website at www.dol.gov. So let's talk a little bit about the written consent. The patient and/or responsible party remains in control of decision making and care. Patients are allowed to make their own decisions. Any services that are delivered to patients must require a written consent from the patient and/or responsible party. For example, a parent of a minor must make the decisions if a minor is under the age of 18. When the consent for care is signed, it authorizes the agency and its staff to deliver services that have been agreed upon by the agency and the patient. Remember that services are provided for the patient and not delivered to the patient. So listen to that. Services are provided for the patient and not delivered to the patient. The patient and/or responsible party remains in control of decision-making in the care. Part of the consent allows the agency to make referrals or coordinate care on their behalf. The patient has an active part in designing the plan of care for the home care aide to follow. Remember that a patient is allowed to make their own decisions, even if they are not always the best ones. For example, a patient is alert, oriented, and competent, and also an insulin-dependent diabetic, and they choose to eat 2 slices of pie. Then that is the patient's right to make that decision. The aide cannot refuse to allow the patient to eat the pie. The aide can only report to their supervisor and encourage the patient to make good choices. Another example would be if the bath is assigned on Monday through Friday, but the patient refuses it on Tuesday. The aide cannot force the patient to take a bath. The aide should call the office and report the refusal and document on the agency-approved forms for the refusal. The aide should always remain professional and courteous to the patient, even if the aide does not agree with a decision. So let's talk now about some examples of patient responsibilities. They are notifying the home care agency of any scheduling changes, personal or health information. This includes admissions to the hospital, following the plan of care, treating the aide with respect and kindness, keeping the home environment, safe for the aide and other staff, to not abuse the staff in any way, to keep the agency informed of any problems or grievances of services. So let's talk further about legal and ethical issues. It is important to always maintain professional boundaries. Boundary crossing is often unintentional. The aide has a unique relationship with the patient while working in their home. Being with a patient so frequently and working closely with both the patient and the patient's family can be an intimate and emotional experience. It is especially important for the aide to maintain professional boundaries at all times. Professional boundaries are established for both the aide and for the patient. Boundaries protect the aide from being too involved with patients. Likewise, they also protect the patient by keeping the patient at a safe emotional distance. Healthcare professionals or any other helping or caring profession have more specific boundaries, many of which are ethical or even legal issues. Examples of these potential issues would include engaging in outside personal relationships with patients. This especially stresses not to date or have any type of sexual relationship with a patient. Inappropriate financial dealings with the patient. That could even be something as what would seem simple as perhaps if you're selling Pampered Chef products. You would not want to solicit to sell your patient any type of products. Interfering in a patient's personal relationship. It's important to always remain neutral. Accepting gifts or money from patients. Giving patients your personal cell phone and home phone numbers. Visiting patients when not working or assigned to that patient. Discussing one's personal life with a patient. Going places with a patient outside of work-related activities or duties. Often it is a well-intended aide or a patient who can cross an ethical line. Perhaps an aide or a patient is just trying to be nice or not hurt anyone's feelings and does not realize what is happening. The aide cannot trust that a patient will know professional or ethical boundaries. A home care aide must have the knowledge, training, and supervisory support to prevent or correct ethical issues. Even though agencies have a code of ethics in place and have patients' rights and responsibilities printed and distributed, ethical dilemmas may still arise. Ethical dilemmas can be any situation that makes you question if you're doing the right thing, if the family is doing the right thing, or if a patient can be in danger either from themselves or others. If an ethical dilemma arises, contact your supervisor immediately and discuss the situation. Your supervisor can give you immediate guidance as to handle the situation, and then long-term guidance is necessary. An example of an ethical dilemma could be if you know the patient is an insulin-dependent diabetic and a recovering alcoholic. The aide walks in and the patient is eating ice cream and having a mixed drink. It is the patient's choice to do so, but you still must report it and allow your supervisor to guide you through this. Your supervisor will ask if you are safe. Is the patient safe? Was there anything that provoked the situation, etc.? If you feel like your concerns are not being addressed, use the chain of command and contact the next person in charge. Some agencies, especially the larger ones, have an ethics committee where these dilemmas can be problem solved. Ultimately, if a patient is alert and oriented, they have the right to make poor decisions as long as they are informed. So let's talk about patient abuse and neglect. Physical, sexual, psychological, financial, and neglect. The aide should be able to recognize patient abuse and neglect. Please know that you are a mandated reporter. Because seniors are often more compromised due to poor health and little social support, the impact of abuse can be life-threatening. The aide should be aware of signs and symptoms of abuse and must report these to their supervisor immediately. The aide will have frequent and intimate contact with patients and will be the first to observe abuse. Signs of abuse could include but are not limited to physical, unexplained bruising, dislocations, fractures, injuries to the face or head, and burns. Sexual, genital or rectal tearing, STDs, pain, bruising, or itching in the genital areas. Psychological, withdrawn, poor self-esteem, if the patient seems frightened by a caregiver, depression, anxiety, or suicidal thoughts or verbalizations. Financial Financial abuse or exploitation means taking money from the patient without their consent, or the patient feels forced into giving away money. This is something that the patient will usually tell you about. It is often difficult to see financial abuse or exploitation. Neglect. The patient is not being fed, changed, or is being left alone from socialization. An example would be if the aide changes a diaper before they leave and the same diaper is on the next morning when the aide comes back. If you suspect any abuse, neglect, or exploitation, you must report it to your supervisor immediately, even if your patient asks you not to do it. We have discussed abuse by the family or caregiver, but abuse can also happen by the hands of the home care aide. Please note that any abuse, neglect, or exploitation of the patient is strictly prohibited. Consequences can be very, very serious. We often will see this on the news, and so it is really important for you to make sure that you are reporting any suspected abuse or neglect and that you are not abusing or neglecting your patient in any way. So I'd like to spend a few minutes and talk about abuse allegations involving aides. Abuse, neglect, negligence, misappropriation of resident property, misappropriation of the property of a healthcare facility, fraud, and diversion of drugs. So we're going to talk about abuse at the hands of aides, not at family members. The majority of aides who provide services in home care are very capable and caring individuals. However, when certain allegations are suspected involving aides or other unlicensed healthcare workers, healthcare employers are required to submit reports to the Healthcare Personnel Registry Investigations Branch. In this case, the term allegation means one of the following: abuse of a resident, neglect of a resident, diversion of drugs belonging to a resident, diversion of drugs belonging to a healthcare facility, fraud against a resident, fraud against a healthcare facility, misappropriation of the property of a healthcare facility, misappropriation of resident property, or injury of an unknown source. It's important to know what these terms mean. Abuse means the willful infliction of injury, unreasonable confinement, intimidation, or punishment with resulting physical harm, pain, or mental anguish. Examples include slapping or hitting a patient, yelling at a patient, threatening a patient with a punishment or rough treatment while giving care. Neglect means a failure to provide goods and services necessary to avoid physical harm, mental anguish, or mental illness. An example would be not changing a patient's soiled brief, and this leads to skin breakdown and an infection. Negligence means unintentional wrongdoing in which a person fails to act in a reasonable and prudent manner and thereby causes harm to another person or the person's property. An example would be forgetting to lock the brakes on a wheelchair and a patient falls and gets hurt while being transferred in the wheelchair. That person forgot to lock the brakes. It was not willful. Misappropriation of residence property means the deliberate misplacement, exploitation, or wrongful temporary or permanent use of a patient's belongings or money without the patient or resident's consent. Examples would be for the nurse aide to use the patient's lotion on his or her own skin, or to keep the change from a patient's shopping money or shopping trip to buy his or her own lunch. Misappropriation of the property of a healthcare facility means the deliberate misplacement, exploitation, or wrongful or temporary permanent use of a healthcare facility's property without the facility's consent. So an example would be taking a blood pressure cuff and stethoscope for the aide to use on family members or friends. Fraud means an intentional deception or misrepresentation made by a person with the knowledge that the deception could result in some unauthorized benefit to himself or some other person. It includes any act that constitutes fraud under applicable federal or state law. An example would be to take checks from the patient and write and cash them for use by the aide. Diversion of drugs means the unauthorized of taking or use of any drugs. An example would be the aide taking medication from a patient's home or the agency and using it for himself or herself. Once the investigations branch receives a report of an allegation involving an aide from a home care agency, the aide and the aide's actions are investigated by the branch. If the evidence shows that the allegation is true, the aide's name and actions will be listed on the healthcare personnel registry. You do not want that to happen, guys. This is really serious stuff. If a substantiated finding, which means a proven allegation, is listed, it is permanent and remains listed on the registry. Individuals with certain neglect and allegation findings may petition the department to have his or her name removed from the registry. Otherwise, the listing remains on the registry permanently. This listing may cost you your job or future jobs. This just doesn't go away, guys, whenever you leave your agency. Many healthcare facilities cannot hire aides listed on the healthcare personnel registry. Many types of healthcare facilities are required by law to check the healthcare personnel registry before they hire aides or other unlicensed staff. In fact, North Carolina home care licensure rules state that a home care agency shall not hire any individual either directly or by contract who has a substantiated finding, which is a proven allegation on the North Carolina Healthcare Personnel Registry. If you have a proven allegation on the registry, then you could not be hired by a home care agency in the state of North Carolina. Another possible consequence of patient abuse, neglect, or exploitation is that an aide and the aide's actions can be reported to the police and investigated as a crime. The police investigation can lead to action by a court of law, leading to the nurse aide or aide, in this case, It may be a personal care aide or in-home aide, whatever we want to call them, being convicted of a crime. So this is very serious. This is not only you not being able to work as an aide, but you could also be convicted of a crime. The aide will have a criminal record and may not be able to work in certain types of healthcare facilities depending on the type of crime committed. The best way to avoid involvement in abuse, neglect, or exploitation of a patient is to think before you act. Ask yourself that if someone you admire, let's say it's Abe Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr., would they do what you're doing? Would you be embarrassed if your actions were on the headline for tomorrow's newspaper or the 6 o'clock news? Thinking before you act will help you to continue to be a caring and capable aide that you are now becoming. The aide will have no fear of crossing the line with patients or breaking laws if the aide performs only the acts within their scope of the aide practice, and that's what you're learning now. Keeps skills and knowledge current, keeps patient safety and well-being in mind, understands directions for care, follows agency policy, does no harm to patients or their belongings. So let's talk some more about legal and ethical issues. Home care aides may also be faced with legal or ethical issues at their place of employment. When employees are approached and enticed with bonuses or commissions that may try to bring on more patients, even if the patient may not be completely appropriate for home care services. So what does that mean really? Like what exactly does that mean? So let's say that a home care agency is desperate for referrals and they say to an employee, we'll give you a $50 bonus for every new patient you bring in. Is that appropriate? The answer to that question is no. This is both an ethical and a legal issue. So let's talk a bit more about what that means. Many agencies will have an anti-kickback policy in place to protect both the employee and the agency from self-serving interests. This just means that the aides are not able to bring patients with them from agency to agency, nor can they self-refer in order to benefit themselves or the agency. For example, if an agency provides a monetary stipend, we've talked about that, in recruiting new patients, this is considered illegal. Actually, there are federal and typically state laws that try to prevent things like this from happening. When employees are approached and enticed with bonuses or commissions, then this is really a kickback. This is both, again, an ethical and a legal issue. So today you've learned a lot of information about ethical and legal issues. So with that, I'd like for us to move into conclusion. You have a handout and it's about some scenarios. I'd like for you, in conclusion, to hit and end this particular session, review the handout, discuss it with your class, your supervisor, your preceptor, your mentor, and really think about legal and ethical issues in your new role. It's just important to do the right thing. We all know what the right thing is. We don't want to cross boundaries. We want to make sure that we are staying within our scope and making sure that the care that we provide is quality care. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your participation, and please do stop this recording and move into your handout regarding case scenarios. Thank you all, and I hope that you learned something from today's presentation.